we're thrilled to have the film screening in nonfiction. It was by far one of my favourite films of last year. Spoiler alert, I mean, I cried a lot when I saw it the first time, and coming back to rewatch it again recently, it had lost none of that power. It's a really deeply joyous but very, very moving film. And so I'm mindful that our audience is probably taking a moment to collect themselves right now. So I wanted to start a little further back. Right at the beginning of the film, you introduce yourself and your father, who are the two main characters, and you introduce it in a really interesting way. You say that your dad's a psychiatrist and you're a camera person. And I sort of loved this because I feel like both of these professions, you both have to listen, you both have to observe, you both have to think outside the box. So it's kind of this perfect setup for making the film. But can you tell us how you became a camera person?
Oh, well, I'm just so happy to meet you and happy to be here with everyone, and, to all of the audience who is collecting or not collecting themselves in bits or not in bits. I just want everyone to know that I think of audiences as making films with us, so that the film is sort of being made by you in this moment and in the moments of you watching it. So I'm really happy that everyone's here together. And, I love showing the film to people because people always give me new insights into what I thought I knew about myself and my own life. And somebody said to me recently, they said, oh, well, it's like you gave your dad a chance to understand more of your profession, and he gave you a chance to understand more of his, so that he got to become a filmmaker and you got to become a psychiatrist, which I thought was sort of beautiful and hadn't occurred to me. I did go to college thinking I wanted to go into psychiatry in that way that young people do imagine not yet the world, but only what their parents have been. And then I promptly got a, terrible grade in the first biology class. And I was like, this is not for me. But becoming a camera person happened because I had gone to Dakar, Senegal after college because I was really interested in West African filmmaking. And somebody there told me about the French National Film School, and they said it's free. And, you can get in. And then I went to France and they said, oh, no Americans have ever gone here. Of course you can't go to our school. And then I said, well, can I try as a French person? And they were like, you could try.
I should just interject at this point. You are talking about probably the most prestigious film school in the world.
With like a year-long competition to get into it, right?
Yeah.
And I knew nothing about that at the time. And literally the man said to me something like, I'm not sure you understand, but la crème de la crème of France goes to this school. And I didn't understand, but I was sort of undaunted. And I talked to, some friends in Paris, and they were like, you're crazy. You're never getting into this school. And you'll definitely never get in if you try as a director, which is what I was going to try.
So that's what you were thinking of going in.
Yeah, it's like I wanted to direct films. And they said, you should sneak in through one of the technical departments.
That's cool.
And I was like, I didn't really know how to do anything at that point, but I, was somewhat familiar with photography. And I was like, okay, I'll go in, I'll try to get into the camera department. And, by a miracle, I got in after a year's competition to get into this school. I think, I had learned French in Senegal. So I had this amazing, like, Wolof American accent that everyone was like, where are you from? And so, but I got into the cinematography department, and sort of as soon as I was able to touch the first big film camera, like a big 35 millimeter film camera, I had that feeling of like, you're letting me touch this, and this is the center of everything. This is where everything happens. And that was it. Then I was just sort of in love with what cameras allowed me to do.
And I guess because it's interesting, you've shot so many amazing documentaries for other filmmakers, as well as your own first film camera person, which is an incredible feat of filmmaking in itself. When you say the camera is in the center, what does that allow you to do in terms of accessing stories and people and observing that process?
Well, I mean, I think you'll notice this from talking to me. I like to add but I think that the camera allows many different things to happen, and sometimes completely contradictory things. And so I think we are most familiar with terms like, oh, a camera puts distance between you and other people. A camera protects you from people. I like to use terms, because of what I've experienced while filming, is that a camera is catalytic. A camera makes things happen. The two of us here having this conversation, we're over Zoom, we're across the world, but I can see a little red button in the corner of my Zoom saying recording. And this is what I think happens when you film, is there's a little red button flashing, and this gives our conversation stakes. We know we've got a certain amount of time. People are listening and we want to keep them listening. And we also know that that little red light flashing means what we are saying will exist in the future, whether we are here or not. So it also brings we are being transformed into images and to sound, and it also brings our mortality into the room. You or I, this is pre-recorded, right? You or I could die before anyone sees this, and then this will be our last words. So what that means is this matters.
And I guess it's interesting because in connection to your film, you also are able to stretch time, to preserve time, to keep a moment. So thinking about your father's mortality, or all of our mortality, because I feel like the film does make us think about all of us, but being able to preserve these moments with your father, is this the purpose of the film at the end of the day, or is it much bigger than that?
Well, I love that you see that as one of its purposes. For sure, I see the film as a time machine. I see it as a magical container for my father, that is, almost like having a spirit or a hologram or some three-dimensional object that is flat, that means he will never die for me, right? And I think this has to do why I needed this so badly, and sort of why I turned to cinema, was because of the devastating impact that my mother's Alzheimer's had on me. And also how much filming I have done with people around the world who have lived through epically horrible things. I've filmed many genocides and post-conflict situations, and people's memories, they're so fragile and they're so fragmented and they're so traumatized, that to witness people who can no longer remember what their loved one looked like or sounded like, but they desperately grieve them, and to know that I've experienced that also with my mother, that was the wish of somehow we hold on to this, which I think is we all share this so deeply in common. We sort of don't know what we wish to hold on to until we can't hold on to it anymore.
And there's so many, the film is full of beautiful moments, but there's a lot of wonderful moments in the making of the film where, by virtue of making the film, you're having a lot of conversations with your father about a topic that cannot be easy to talk to someone about. And do you feel like the film allowed you or gave you both permission to have difficult conversations with each other?
Such a lovely question. I mean, the great thing about my father is that he always made all of our conversations easy. And, not completely. I couldn't talk to him about everything, but among the people I have known in my life and loved, he probably was the easiest one to have hard conversations with. And I think one of the things that I learned from him and I love about him is that he thinks relationships happen in conversation. And
that's
that
beautiful.
he's sort of right. And he thought that about his own psychiatry. I think he lived through many changes in the field of psychiatry where it went, really from talk therapy to much more medicine based in the way people were treated. And I think he had doubts all the way along the way about his capacity to heal anyone of mental illness. But he said, if anything can heal, it might be the relationship that heals.
Wow, that's really amazing.
Right? So I think that's what it felt like what we were doing in this is having our relationship together, having it through making something together. And then as the dementia advanced, we imagined things that we could do out of the limitations dementia was creating for us. So those heaven sequences, for example, we filmed those in super slow motion because my dad's dementia was to a place where he would say, well, where are we? What's happening? In the next sentence. But if we could stretch out time, then he just smiled for a really long time. And he was in that moment so that, a few moments of a smile could last for 3 minutes.
Wow.
So we sort of entered his dementia escape, but through the magic of cinema.
Well, there's so much movie magic in this film. I love the moment after what is a very intense scene, the Halloween scene, which I feel, it's hard to watch that on all levels. But then that moment where you pull back and we see the set, and it's almost like you're giving us, the audience, a moment to go, okay, this is just a movie. I know it's real, but you have a moment to catch your breath. But you grew up in the Seventh-day Adventist church, and am I right in thinking that movies are a no-no?
That's right. That's right. You are right in that. But it's so magical the way in which they're no-no. Like it's like any set of rules, they get broken or there's sort of subversive ways around them. And I was not allowed to see movies in movie theaters as a child. Especially for your audiences, I will tell you, my father found out that they were doing this series on Australian film at the University of Washington. And he took me sort of with my mother, not quite knowing what we were doing. We were going to hear lectures, right? But we went and we saw Picnic at Hanging Rock. I saw The Chant of Jimmy Blacksmith.
Oh, wow.
I saw The Wave. And you sort of finally and like horribly, she ended up coming the day that they were showing Mad Max. That was it. And, I was like pulled right back out of the theater.
This is why you can't have nice things.
This is why you cannot have nice things. But so there was just always this push-pull around being exposed, not being exposed to things. And my father, I think, was thrilled by cinema and excited about the psychological complexity that could exist in cinema. And he was always trying to like find a way, so I do think like, we saw Harold and Maude on a bootleg VHS at some friend's house,
wow.
Like things like that were happening.
An underground.
But it's really fun to talk to, you know, an Australian audience, because it really was that film series, the Australian film series that, you know, I can still remember the raw egg dropping and the blood dropping in the kitchen at the chant of Jimmy Blacksmith. You know, like it really marked me because I had seen so few things in the cinema.
And there's a lovely line where right at the beginning of the film, your dad says, "I've always wanted to be in the movies." And it's really heartbreaking, and it's funny, and it's warm, which I feel are probably the three things that sum up your film. But there's that movie magic and those wonderful moments of, you know, the reality, but also the daydreaming. And it feels very natural that we have these almost daydreamy sequences in the film. But the film is formally complex in how you've structured it. So I wondered if you could just talk to us about how you, and I noticed your editor and co-writer, Nels Bangatar. So how do you work together, and how did you structure this?
Yes. You're so kind in the way that you're approaching this. So there was a deliberate wish to acknowledge that we were not in control in the making of this film, in the same way that we are, you know, mostly not in control of when we might die, and we're certainly not in control if dementia enters our lives. But also, in my experience of documentary work, that we're not particularly in control at all with documentary work. And one of the joys of it is just these remarkable, unexpected things keep happening. And that's part of the thrill of it, is just you don't see it coming. So what I know about documentary is that you can count on the unexpected, and that you learn things from the unexpected. And what I also know about filmmaking is that a timeline, you know, we lay things out on a timeline, and that creates a sequence, but that doesn't have to be in chronological order, and that it is possible to go back and forth between the observed and the imagined, between life and death. And that was sort of the, you know, the deep concept of this film. And, you know, like everyone's like, why do you want to kill your father and over again? It's like, well, I want him to come back to life. I want him to not be dead. I want to hug him after his funeral, right? So all of that sort of motivation of like, can I get mischievous with time? Can I get mischievous with life and death, and go there, but then get back out of it again? Can we do Dad's real funeral, but it didn't really happen, but it did, and his friend really sobbed, but he also knew he wasn't dead? You know, can all of those things happen? So we planned to do many things out of order with the filmmaking process. Okay. So we planned to edit early, learn something from the footage, then imagine a fictional scene that could enter into the fictional moment. We did sound mixing early because we didn't know what the tone of this film would be. So, you know, the horn that his best friend plays in the funeral.
Oh my God, that scene.
We tried many different versions of it. That's not really what it sounded like, right?
Because there is a wonderful moment where you cut to a woman who's like,
right? And she really made that expression, but she made it at something else that happened in the funeral, right? So we're playing with these, you know, those are all my father's real friends, but we also know we can edit their reactions out of order to what really happened, right? So we're using ideas of performance, of fiction, of editing to go sort of like crack open this space in between things.
That's so great.
It's real fun. And, you know, like, so the Halloween sequence, for example, that you mentioned, I think for me, I'm so deeply excited about that because it was one of those terrible moments where I discovered like, oh, I've gone too far. We left my father in a friend's apartment, and up until that time that had been fine. And he could sit in a place and watch TV and it would be fine. But that time, I think because we'd been out trick-or-treating, it was so creepy and scary. He was completely disoriented. He'd put himself to bed in those people's bed. He didn't know where he was. He was trying to get out. So suddenly I was like, I can never leave him alone again.
Wow.
But I had done it. I had gone too far without knowing that I would. And this is where it like gets into the ethics of these things. Like with dementia, you don't know when you're doing something too late or too early, right? If you take your father's car keys away, have you done it too early or too late, right?
It's a tough moment to see
Yeah.
that, but
Yeah.
and it's tough. It's equally tough for both of you. But yeah, I think the moment of, yeah, how do you make those choices? It must be so, I guess it's ever changing for you on a daily basis.
That's right. And sometimes it goes in reverse, right? Where it's like this person still has great capacities of independence and you have over infantilized them, right? And then they're mad at you. And so that sort of back and forth that I had experienced with my mother's Alzheimer's really opened up this freedom. And so that like in that Halloween sequence, we could say, we're going to cut back into that moment where I went too far and then open it up and imagine what did that apartment feel like to him? And with all the, doors he couldn't get out of. And then we could put him in his costume and have him be there. But then we see that that's all a set, so it just became fun of like, peel back one more layer, peel back one more layer. But that shoot didn't happen until very late in the filmmaking, right? But we knew we were going to try to make and break the film all the way until the very end, which is what we did.
And I imagine that, as you were asking him to do things, was his good, jolly nature what allowed you to make the film? Because he's very vulnerable. Like, he has to be silly.
That's right. I mean, I feel like I still have so much to learn from him as a human in terms of the trust he showed me in this process and his own willingness to play with his image, that he is just that even if we were to, like go too far, go over the edge, make a film that didn't work, it was like what mattered to him was his relationship to me and that he trusted me. Now, you can imagine that put me in kind of a tough position. I really wanted to deliver for him. I really wanted to make a funny film for him, but it was like increasingly not funny at all. But I think we all have met human beings who have faced like just sort of horrific injustice or total tragedy. And somehow they can see the absurdity of life. They can still laugh at life. And I feel like for me, in some ways, like being bolder than I imagined I could be was like some sort of homage to people who like they have been through it and yet they still love this life. And like, what does it take to do that and to be that? And that's what I love about my father. I think as a psychiatrist, he listened to horrific things all day long, but had joy and humor and love of humans always. So that's the wish, and that's what you have to sort of live up to on a certain level. I have to say, I think my dad, that making this movie with me is on his own terms, even though the dementia is like ripping him apart. He's like holding on and laughing for the ride of it all the way. So it's a film of that I feel gives him that. It's a film of great dignity and beauty, and it's such an incredible achievement. Thank you so much for making it and for allowing us for this
to
conversation.
see it.
And I hope you get to go out on your own terms very long time from now.